Welcome to Emtron Training Part 50. In this training tutorial, we're going to be taking a look at working with our stage injection feature. Our stage injection allows us to control two sets of injectors, a primary and a secondary set, independent of each other. And we can phase in the secondary set as we'd like as we're driving. There's a lot to know and talk about here. Let's jump in and talk about stage injection and how to program it properly within our Emtron. Okay, so let's get started. We're going to be taking a look at working with our staged fuel injection feature and programming within our Emtron ECU. Our staged fuel injection allows us to run more than one set of injectors. So for example, if you're a turbocharged 4-cylinder engine and you're running on something like ethanol or methanol-based fuel, a single set of injectors is not going to be enough to provide the fuel flow rate you need to make high power at high boost levels. You're going to need a secondary set of injectors. The staged injection will allow us to bring in the secondary set of injectors and additional fuel flow rate when we get into higher boost situations. We have complete control of how we phase the injectors in and phase the secondary injectors out from spraying. We'll talk about all of those scenarios here in this tutorial. We also might be in a situation where you have an engine that you want to run a very smooth running engine. You want it to be very, very crisp and easy drivability when you're in, let's say, idle and part throttle conditions. That's going to be accomplished with a smaller set of injectors, something like a 500, 800, 1000 cc injector. Those run relatively linear at all low pulse widths that we would find idle and part throttle situations. If we're dealing with a 2000 cc injector, they're going to be hard to control, especially on something like a petrol-based fuel, because the pulse width is going to be relatively low, and we'll find as a result the air-fuel repeatability and just the drivability is not going to be as good as a smaller injector. So if we're in a situation where we want to have good drivability and being able to have the fuel flow rate when we get into higher boost levels, you may want to work with a stage injection, where the primary set of injectors will be smaller than the secondary set of injectors. So for example, we might have 500 cc injectors on the primaries and 2000 cc injectors on the secondaries, and being able to bring in the secondary injectors when we get into boost. So we'll have the best of both worlds. We can have a nice compromise. Another situation you might find yourself in, if you're tuning individual throttle bodies and you have your typical port injectors, that's your primary injectors, that's going to provide the fuel flow that you need under idle and part throttle conditions. And when you get into full throttle, you might have a secondary set of injectors mounted on top of the trumpet horns on the ITBs. This will give you additional power and torque gains from the increased atomization of the fuel spraying out of those secondary injectors, essentially on top and in front of the throttle plate. Now, when we're doing this, we have to stage in those secondary injectors because we need the throttle bodies themselves to be fully open, to have enough vacuum to allow that fuel to be sucked right into the engine. Otherwise, we can get puddling and get all kinds of uneven air fuel distribution between cylinders. Definitely something we want to avoid. The stage injection will allow us to accomplish that. The last scenario you might find yourself in, and this is definitely on the more rare side of things, but you might have an engine that you're running two separate types of fuel on. You're running two fuel rails, one primary, one secondary, two sets of injectors, two sets of fuel lines, two fuel pressure regulators, two fuel tanks, and two separate fuel pumps. In this situation, you have two completely separated fuel systems. One fuel system, your primary injectors, let's say you're running on 87 octane for idle and normal part throttle driving. Your secondary set of injectors in your second fuel system might be on something like ethanol. In this situation, you'd be able to go in and run your engine part throttle and idle 87 octane, be relatively cheap to keep that engine running. And then when you get into boost, we can turn off the primary injectors, not spray 87 octane, and actually bring in an ethanol or methanol or race gas based fuel to be able to provide the octane and the cooling effect we need as we get into boost. So we could have that kind of benefit with the stage injection. There's all kinds of ways we can manipulate and work with stage injection. Let's jump in here and talk about how to turn this on, how to program it, and some of the details that we need to know in order to be successful with implementing the stage injection. So the first thing I want to do here is move from my tuning page and go into configure. Under configure here, we're going to go under fuel and then into fuel main. Now we're looking down here, and the first thing we find is injection mode. We've talked about this in a very early training tutorial in our training course. We can find that this gives us some options for programming how we're working with the injection feature. So off turns off the injectors here. Sequential, that means that we have a cam sync fitted to our engine. We know the number one cylinder position as the engine's going through the auto cycle. This allows us to time the injection event to the intake valve opening on each cylinder, specifically on number 1, but if we know what number 1 is doing, then we can base all the rest of the cylinders in the firing order for going in and spraying the fuel. We do have some other options here. We have sequential, staged sequential, and sequential staged group. These two options here are going to be what we cover here in the tutorial. So this is going to be assuming if you go and choose your option 2 here. We have a cam sync, our primary injectors are on sequential fire operation, and then the secondary set of injectors are going to be on staged sequential. So we're going to be sequentially firing the secondary set of injectors. We also have this third option here, sequential staged group. The secondary set of injectors will be group fired, meaning they're all going to fire at the same time. We can go and assign those to specific drivers for the injector outputs, or we can go and start to pair up injectors to drivers. So we might find that, Thanks for checking out our teaser clip. If you want to see the rest of this video and more than 500 hours of current EFI training we have to offer, make sure you click right here. If you want to go and check out more teaser clips from this training course, click here, and you don't want to miss any of the videos we're going to be releasing on this channel, so make sure you subscribe and click here. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys later.